They say every family has secrets, but I never imagined mine would start with a single photograph. I was cleaning out Mom's closet when the box fell. It hit the floor, scattering receipts, letters, and old photographs. One picture landed face up, a young man standing in front of a red truck, smiling like he had the whole world ahead of him. At first, I didn't think much of it, until I looked closer. He had my eyes.M, why smile? Even the same scar near the eyebrow, the one I got from falling off my bike when I was 6. Before we go deeper, make sure you subscribe if you love true-style family revenge stories like this one. Drop a like and comment. What would you do if you discovered your whole childhood was built on a lie? The back of the photo said one word, written in Mom's familiar cursive, Thomas. I'd never heard that name before. My father, according to every story she ever told, was named Mark. A man who supposedly left when I was a baby. A man who didn't care enough to stay. But the man in the picture wasn't Mark, and deep down I already knew. That night, I waited until Mom went to bed. I crept back in her closet and searched through the box again. There were more photos. Thomas at a lake, Thomas holding a baby, Thomas next to a woman with her face torn out of the picture. The baby was me. My hands started shaking. There were hospital forms too, birth certificates, insurance cards, and tucked between them, a folded letter that looked like it had been opened and resealed dozens of times. It was addressed to my son, Liam. That's me. I unfolded it carefully, my eyes darting over the faded ink. I'm sorry I missed your first birthday. I'm fighting to see you. Your mother won't return my calls, but I'll never stop trying. I love you, son, Dad. Dad. The word hit me like a punch. Because this wasn't the man Mom described, the one who walked out when things got hard. This was someone who wanted to be there, someone she'd kept away. The next morning, I sat across from her at breakfast, the photo tucked in my pocket. She was humming to herself, scrolling on her phone like it was any other day. Mom, I said. She looked up. Who's Thomas? Her spoon froze midair. Then she forced a smile. Thomas? Why? I found an old picture in your closet, I said, watching her carefully. You wrote his name on the back. It looks a lot like me. The color drained from her face. She laughed, too quickly. Oh, honey, that's just someone I knew a long time ago. Someone you knew, I repeated. Or someone who's my father? She didn't answer right away, just stared at me like I'd just spoken a language she didn't understand. Then her voice went sharp. Where did you find that? Does it matter? It does, she snapped. Because you had no right to go through my things. No right, I said, my voice shaking. You lied to me my whole life, and I have no right. She stood up so fast her chair scraped the floor. Liam, enough. You don't understand what happened back then. Then explain it, I said. Tell me why you said my dad's name was Mark. Tell me why you said he left. Her eyes flicked toward the photo in my hand. For a moment, something like fear passed through them. Then she sighed, shoulders slumping. Because Thomas wasn't ready to be a father, she said finally. He didn't want you. He told me to get rid of you. The words hit me like a slap. But even as she said them, her eyes wouldn't meet mine. Why do I not believe that? I whispered. She hesitated just a beat too long. Then she said, because you want to believe in fairy tales, Liam. But life isn't one. I left the house that night. I couldn't stand to be near her. I drove until the roads went dark, pulled over near the old river bridge, and sat there gripping the steering wheel, trying to breathe. The man in the photo wouldn't leave my head. My eyes looked honest. Kind. I didn't know if he was alive, where he was, or what he'd done, but I knew one thing for sure. Mom had lied, and I was done living inside her story. The truth was out there, and this time I was going to find it. I didn't go home that night. I drove around until dawn, watching the fog roll across the empty streets, and wondering what kind of person could tell a lie that big for that long. When the sun came up, I parked near the old diner on Main Street, ordered black coffee, and tried to piece together what I just learned. Everything I thought I knew about my life had a hole punched straight through the center of it. Every memory, birthdays, bedtime stories, even the way she used to say, you have your father's stubborn streak, felt suddenly artificial, rewritten to fit a script she controlled. By the time I walked back into the house, I wasn't angry anymore. I was cold. Mom was sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, eyes swollen like she hadn't slept. She looked up when I came in, but didn't say anything. I want the truth, I said. My voice sounded calm, even gentle, but I could feel the tremor underneath. All of it. She set the cup down. I already told you. No, I cut in. You told me a story. I want the truth. For a long moment, she didn't move. Then she stood, walked to the window, and stared out at the yard like she could find an answer there. It was a long time ago, she said finally. Things were complicated. Complicated? I laughed to sound bitter. You made up a man, Mom. You gave him a fake name. You built an entire lie and expected me to worship it. She turned then, eyes sharp. You think I had a choice? I was 20. I had a baby, and no one helped me. Thomas wasn't the man you think he was. Then what was he? Her lips tightened. He was unreliable. He drank. He disappeared for days. He couldn't hold a job. It sounded rehearsed. Too clean. Too ready. You told me he left us, I said slowly, that he didn't want me. That's true. I reached into my jacket and pulled out the letter, the one she'd hidden in the box. Then why did he write this? Her breath caught. For a second, she looked smaller, almost frightened. Where did you get that? You kept it, I said. You hid from me. She sat down hard. You weren't supposed to see those. Why? Because they make you look bad? No, she said softly. Because they made me feel bad. I stared at her, unsure I'd heard right. I didn't want to remember him, she whispered. I didn't want to remember how much I loved him and how quickly he broke me. He left, Liam. He left before you were even a month old. Then one day, he came back with flowers and promises, and I let myself believe him again. And then he left for good. Her voice cracked. For a second, I almost believed her. But the image of the man from the photo, the letters, the handwriting, the warmth in his words, wouldn't leave my mind. He wrote to me every year, I said quietly. Didn't he? She didn't answer. Didn't he? She covered her face with her hands. Yes. The word came out muffled, barely a whisper. I couldn't stand it, she said. Every time one of those letters came, it felt like he was haunting me. I wanted him gone. I wanted to build something stable for you, something that didn't depend on a man who only knew how to disappoint people. So I made Mark. Someone simple, distant, easy to hate. I sat down across from her, my mind spinning. You didn't protect me, I said. You protected yourself. She looked up at me then, eyes wet. Maybe, but you had a normal childhood. You went to school. You were safe. Safe from what? The truth. Her shoulders sagged. I didn't want you to end up like him. I pushed the letter toward her. You made sure I never had the chance. For the rest of the day, we moved around the house like ghosts. I tried to eat, couldn't. Every sound, the fridge humming, the creak of the floor, felt too loud, like the house itself was listening. In the afternoon, she knocked on my door. Liam, she said softly, please, sit with me. Let's talk. I opened the door, but didn't invite her in. Talk about what? About him. About us. She stood there clutching a mug, steam curling into the air. I don't expect you to forgive me, she said, but I need you to understand. Thomas wasn't a bad man when I met him. He was just lost. He wanted to be better, but he never knew how. I crossed my arms. Then why tell me he abandoned us? Because I couldn't tell you that I was the one who left, she said. Her voice cracked on the last word. I packed our things while he was at work. I left a note. I thought he'd come after us. He didn't. My throat went dry. You took me away. I was terrified he'd hurt you like he hurt me. But he tried to find me. I said. He wrote. You knew he was looking. She nodded. And every time he wrote, I told myself it was guilt, not love. I didn't answer. There was nothing left to say. The image I had of her, strong, selfless, honest, was cracked in half. The worst part was knowing she could still justify it. She'd lied so long she believed it was kindness. That night, I sat in the garage with the old box spread out in front of me. There were a dozen letters, each one sealed and never opened. Postmarks from different towns, different years. The last one was from 6 years, AGO.IT said. I don't know if these are getting through anymore. I still hope you'll reach out one day. I'm not the same man I was. I just want to know if he's happy. Tell him his father loves him. I pressed the paper to my chest and closed my eyes. For the first time, the word father didn't sound like an absence. It sounded like a possibility. I looked up at the shelves around me. Dad's old tools, the spare paint cans, the boxes of my childhood things, and made a decision. I wasn't going to let her version of the story be the last one. If Thomas was still out there, I was going to find him. And when I did, Mom would finally have to face what she'd done. Sleep was useless after that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the torn photographs and the stack of unopened envelopes. I'd grown up thinking I was an accident that someone walked away from, and now it turned out I was a son who had been stolen. By morning, I had a mission. I opened my laptop and typed the only clue I had. Thomas Plus, our hometown name. Thousands of hits, too many to make sense of. I tried the full name from the hospital forms in the box. That narrowed it down to 5. The third one stopped me cold. A professional website. Thomas Reed, civil engineer, Lockridge Development. His headshot was older, more lines, more gray. But it was him. The same sharp jaw, the same eyes. My eyes. His bio mentioned he'd relocated to Seattle 10 years ago, was married, had 2 wonderful children. There was even a photo, a teenage girl, maybe 15, and a boy a little younger. His family. For a long time, I just stared. He looked happy. Not like a man who'd given up a child. Not like the monster Mom had painted him to be. When my hands finally stopped shaking, I found his company's contact form and typed a message. Subject, Inquiry Hello. I'm looking to reach Mr. Thomas Reed regarding a personal matter. I believe we may have family ties. Liam. I hit send before I could lose my nerve. By the next day, I'd almost convinced myself it was a mistake. He had new life. He'd probably ignore me. Then, that afternoon, an email pinged in my inbox. From Thomas Reed. Subject. Inquiry Hello, Liam. I think I know who you are. Please tell me where you're writing from. My heart raced. He knew. We exchanged a few messages that evening. His tone was cautious but kind. He asked about my work, my life, if my mother was well. I didn't tell him much. I just said I wanted to understand what had happened between them. His last message came at midnight. It's hard to explain over email. Can we talk on the phone? When I heard his voice the next day, something inside me cracked open that he sounded exactly like I remembered from old videos Mom had taken when I was a toddler. Steady, warm, patient. Liam, he said softly, I've waited a long time to hear your voice. I couldn't speak at first. I don't know what to say. I finally managed. Say whatever you want, he said. You deserve answers. I took a breath. Why did you leave? Silence on the line. Then, that's not how it happened. He told me his version. He and Mom had been young, yes, but he hadn't run away. They'd fought about money, about my future, but he'd wanted to stay. Then, one morning, he came home to an empty apartment. No note, no forwarding address, nothing. She just vanished, he said quietly. I called every hospital, every friend. Then I got a letter, one line. She said you'd both moved on and that you were safe. That's all. I thought maybe she didn't want me around. But you wrote, I said. I did. For years. She never answered. I thought, his voice broke. I thought you were dead, Liam. She told me once, in a letter she sent back, that you'd been in a car accident, that you didn't make it. I sat there gripping the phone, staring at the wall. She told me you left us, I said. He laughed then, a hollow sound. She was always good at rewriting things. We talked for hours. He told me about the family he built after giving up hope of finding us. About his wife, who knew everything. About how he still kept one of my baby photos in his wallet. When he asked if I wanted to meet, I said yes without thinking. I didn't tell Mom. I couldn't. For the next week, I acted like nothing had changed. We went through the motions, dinner, work, small talk, but every conversation felt like a lie wrapped in another lie. She seemed relieved that I wasn't bringing up Thomas anymore. I even caught her smiling again, humming while she cooked. It was almost cruel to let her think things were normal. That Friday, I drove 6 hours north to Seattle. He was waiting at a cafe near the waterfront. When I walked in, he stood, hands trembling slightly. Liam. I nodded. Up close, the resemblance was even stronger. We hugged, awkward at first, then tighter longer. I didn't realize I was crying until I felt his shoulder damp under my cheek. "You look just like her," he said. "And just like me." We sat for hours talking about his work, my life, the letters she hid. He asked about Mom, cautiously, as if the name itself might break something fragile. I told him she was the same, polite on the outside, steel underneath. "I don't want you to hate her," he said finally. I looked at him. "I don't know what I feel." "She thought she was protecting you," he said. "From me, maybe. From disappointment. But she didn't understand that lies don't protect anyone. They just rot slowly." He reached into his jacket then and pulled out a small envelope. Inside was an old photo, me on his shoulders at a park. "Your mother took this," he said softly. It was a last picture before she left. For a moment, I could see the world they must have had. A young couple, uncertain but hopeful, holding a baby that connected them more than they ever understood. Then it was gone, replaced by the years of silence that followed. When we parted, he said, "I don't want to push, but if you ever want a place to stay, we have room. My wife knows about you. She's wanted to meet you for a long time." I nodded, unable to speak. Driving home that night, I kept glancing at the photo on the passenger seat. For once, I felt like I belonged somewhere, not in Mom's polished version of the past, but in something real. When I got home, the lights were still on. Mom was sitting at the table, phone in hand. "You went to see him," she said quietly. I froze. "How did you?" I checked your browser history. The rage in her eyes wasn't fear, it was betrayal. "How could you do that to me, Liam? After everything I sacrificed?" "Hier. You didn't sacrifice. You erased." She stood up, voice trembling. "He'll ruin everything. You don't know him like I do." "Maybe not," I said, heading for my room. "But at least he didn't lie." Her voice followed me down the hall. "You're making a mistake." But for the first time in my life, I knew I wasn't. That night, as I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, I realized something. The truth was finally mine, but the revenge, that would come next. Not through shouting, not through fighting, through exposure. I was going to make her live in the truth she'd spent 20 years hiding from. The box in the garage was heavier than it looked. When I cracked the lid, a smell of paper and old ink hit me. Same smell the hospital folders had, like a place that remembered everything. Letters stacked in neat piles. Envelopes rusted along the folds, each stamped and addressed in a hand that felt strangely intimate. Thomas Reed. My hands trembled as I drew out the first envelope. Postmarks from places I'd never been. Seattle, Portland, a handful from towns along the coast. They spanned a decade. None of them had been opened. Why hadn't she burned them? Why had she kept them? The questions came at me like winter wind, cold, sharp, impossible to ignore. I sat down right there on the concrete floor and started reading. The first one was simple, an apology. The ink had faded, but the words were clear. I thought if I wrote enough, she'd come back to me. I didn't know what else to do. "I'm sorry I wasn't there for you. I carried the photo in my wallet for years. If you ever want to know me, I'll be here." That wasn't the voice of a man who'd vanished out of cruelty. That was the voice of someone who'd been trying and failing. A voice that had been shut out. A few letters later, there was a short note with a hospital stamp. My breath caught as I read it. My name written in full, the way my mother wrote it when she was trying to be formal. They said the baby had a fever and that it would pass. "I'm coming back tonight. Please don't leave." This one was dated 2 months after I was born. I kept reading until the sun slanted through the garage window and turned the dust into light. Each letter revealed small, stubborn details. Plans to come to town, requests for visitation, questions about the neighborhood, sometimes anger. Why won't she let me see him? And sometimes hope. Maybe this next month I'll get to hold him. There were postcards, scribbled nothings, long handwritten pages where he signed off with "Love always." The box felt like a secret chapel, a place where time had been folded and preserved. The more I read, the more my stomach filled with lead. He'd been trying, not from afar, but up close. He'd never once given up. When I reached the bottom of the pile, My hands paused on a stack of envelopes sealed with tape. They looked newer. I slit one open with a finger and found a photo inside. Thomas, younger but unmistakable, standing on a ferry with a look on his face that was all longing. On the back, Mom had scrawled, in a hand I recognized, "Do not open." The rest was smeared as if she tried to scrub the words away. I felt foolish for being surprised that she'd told me not to open it. Of course she would. She'd built a fortress around her choices and stacked the stones with these words. There was also a different kind of note, letters she'd written but never sent. Pages where her cursive broke and mended, confessions she never had the courage to mail. On one of them she'd written, "I wanted to protect him from disappointment, but I think I hurt him more." Then beneath, in a different tremor of ink, "I couldn't keep living in the shadow of his mistakes." I read until the garage lights flickered and I realized the driveway had gone dark. The letters had a cumulative effect, like a slow leak through the hull of a boat. My certainty that Mom had lied for my good began to leak away, replaced by the simple, terrible truth. She'd chosen her version of our life and kept me for mine. There were practical things, too. A notarized receipt where she'd signed away visitation. Phone logs showing numbers blocked. Copies of messages I'd never seen. Each paper was a small engineered decision, a deliberate act that kept two lives separate. When I finally stood, my knees ached from sitting too long. I gathered the letters and put them in a plastic bag, then slipped on a jacket. The house was silent when I walked in, Mom probably asleep. I padded past the kitchen and stopped at her bedroom door. The light was off, but the curtain billowed slightly with the night breeze. I could have walked away. I could have burned everything or confronted her in the way that would make her flinch. Instead, I went to the living room, sat at the dining table, and laid the letters out like evidence on a courtroom table. A plan formed slowly, not out of rage, but out of a brittle need for justice. The letters had given me the truth. Now I needed to decide what to do with it. Everything about Mom's life, the PDA, the church group, the people who'd called her kind and steady, was built on a story. Her story. I could expose her and watch the scaffolding fall. Or I could take another route, one that hurt less people and punished more what mattered, the lie itself. I closed my eyes and thought about Thomas's words, the ones he'd written with hope. "If you ever want to know me, I'll be here." He kept a light on in the window. Mom had been the one to shutter it. She needed to understand the consequences of shuttering lives. Not with a scene in the front yard, not with confrontation soaked in fury, but by slowly removing the privileges she'd gained through deception. Her standing in the community, her unquestioned word, the quiet authority she wielded. If she'd made me into her story, I would rewrite the narrative using her own pens, the letters, the dates, the receipts, the proof. That didn't mean immediate ruin. It meant letting her see the truth move through the world in small, precise ways until the construct she relied on began to wobble. I'd make sure the church board knew the facts. I'd ensure the school committee had copies of the letters. I'd place factual, unemotional evidence where it would be noticed by people whose authority mattered. I didn't want to humiliate her in public as much as dismantle the lie she'd traded safety for. Let the community reconcile her actions with a woman they trusted. Let her feel the slow isolation of credibility eroding. I packed a small envelope with copies, duplicates of the worst ones, the ones where her signatures had silenced a father's call, and tucked them into my jacket. I also made sealed copies and sent a set to a P.O. box in another town under a name only I used. Redundancy would be my insurance. Then I did something that felt like stepping across a line. I took one of Thomas's unopened envelopes, one addressed to Liam from 2 months after my birth, and slipped it in my back pocket. I had no idea if reading it would be a balm or a blow, but it felt like claiming something that had been denied to me for decades. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at my kitchen table with a mug of cold coffee and plotted a roadmap. Not the dramatic kind of revenge I'd once imagined, shouts and ruined holiday dinners, but a cold, surgical unseating of a lie. I would expose the truth, layer by layer, to the people who had trusted Mom. I would make sure the story she'd sold me for 20 years unraveled in the same careful way she'd woven it, through documents and witnesses, not gossip and screaming. When dawn arrived, I was already at my laptop, drafting a letter to a local historian, a woman who'd known Mom for years and who respected facts. I attached copies of a single, innocuous-looking letter and asked if she might help me verify dates. The subject line was bland. The content was precise. No acquiescence, just the smell of paper and proof. It was a small step. It felt enormous. As I clicked send, a part of me wanted to shout across the house, "I know everything." Instead, I folded Thomas's letter, put it against my chest, and let the quiet swell. Mom had hidden a life from me. Now, with her own letters, I would give it back to its rightful owner and make sure she lived long enough to watch the truth settle like dust on the furniture she'd arranged to her liking. I didn't tell Mom I was meeting him. I couldn't bear the idea of her rehearsed face, the way she might try to soften whatever truth came next with some practiced line about doing what was best. This had to be raw and unmediated, my father's reaction unfiltered. The cafe was a small place by the water, the kind of joint with chipped mugs and honest coffee. When I walked in, he was already there, looking over a notebook. He looked older than the photos, lines at the corners of his eyes, a few gray threads at his temples. But when he saw me, something in his face loosened in a way that made the years between us feel smaller. "Liam?" he asked, and his voice was a rough version of the one I'd remembered from the emails, soft and cautious, like someone who's practiced kindness until it's a reflex. "It's me," I said, and I could hear how absurd that sounded, how simple and how enormous at the same time. We sat, and for a long minute neither of us said anything. The city hummed outside the window, seagulls called. A barista knocked a saucer somewhere in the back. We had both lived entire lives inside that space of silence. He reached across the table first and took my hand like he was checking to make sure I was real. "You're him," he said, not a question. When I nodded, he closed his eyes for a second and swallowed. "Go, I'm sorry." "I'm so sorry." Hearing him say, "I'm sorry," in person, words he couldn't have sent through smug, performative letters, felt like a release valve blowing. The sound cracked something inside me I hadn't known was still braced. "Why didn't you?" I started, then stopped. There were 1,000 whys stacked inside me like old invoices, unpaid and urgent. He told me everything he remembered from the day the apartment was empty. From his memory, it wasn't melodrama. It was disorienting and small and human. She'd been distant, he admitted. Arguments about money, about me not being steady enough. I left for work one morning, and when I came back, the place was empty. She left a note. Said she needed to start over. Said she couldn't handle me anymore. I called hospitals, friends, everyone, he said. I begged to know where you were. I thought, maybe she finally had enough and left. But then she wrote. She told me you'd been in an accident. She said you were gone. His eyes filled up without a sound. The word gone hung between us like a lead weight. My fingers tightened on the coffee cup until the cardboard gave against my skin. She told me you left. I said, that you didn't want me. He flinched like the sentence hurt him. I never left on purpose, he said. If I'd known, Liam, if I'd known she would tell you that, I would have torn the city apart to find you. His face crumpled then, the kind of unguarded grief men rarely allow themselves to show. We talked for hours. He described places he'd searched, the nights he'd drunk too much, and the mornings he'd vowed to start again. He told me about the job that eventually let him stabilize, the second marriage that gave him the children who now called me half-brother, the photos he kept in his wallet like a trail of breadcrumbs to a life he never stopped hoping would loop back. There was one detail that hit me like a fist. When I stopped getting answers, he said slowly, she wrote to me that you'd been in a car crash. She said you didn't make it. She wrote it in a way that felt final, like she wanted me to stop. He swallowed hard and stared into his coffee. I thought, I couldn't believe that woman would lie about something like that. So I believed it. I believed her grief, and I let myself grieve. I imagined him in that sequence, reading a note that said his son had died, closing a door inside his chest, and letting everything behind it go. The unfairness of it made my skin crawl. The rage that fluttered up inside me wasn't theatrical. It was a low, animal heat, the kind that wants to find a shape for the wrong and fix it. When I asked why he hadn't come back later, why, after enough time passed, he hadn't hired a private investigator or gone public, he was painfully honest. "I was afraid of what the truth would do to you," he said. "If she told me you'd been hurt, I thought exposing her might hurt you more than the hurt itself. And when I tried to press, when I asked others, people said she was a good woman, that she seemed sincere. I listened to them." His voice thickened. "I was a coward, perhaps. I let hope keep me from anger." Hearing him own the cowardice stung me more than anything. Not because he'd been afraid, because he'd loved me enough to let fear keep him silent, and because he now carried the burden of being the father who hadn't been there. We are all, I realized, complicated by our fears and softened by our wants. At one point, he reached for a paper napkin and wiped his eyes. "When I found your photo on my wallet the other day, after your email started, I cried like a fool," he said. "I thought I'd missed too much. I thought you'd already built a life without me. But your voice on the phone, hearing you say you wanted to meet, it made me feel like a fool for every day I wasted believing we were gone." He looked up slowly, and the steadiness in his face returned. "I won't waste more." We sat in that small cafe and, piece by piece, tried to put the days back together. He told me about the simple things I'd missed. My first soccer game, the time I'd broken my arm, the teacher who'd called him a quiet presence. I told him small facts that seemed like proof that this was real. The scar by my eyebrow, the way my left knee clicks when it rains. He smiled like a man rediscovering a map he hadn't known he'd kept. There was anger in his voice when he said Thomas. No, when he said her name. "I wrote to her for years," he said. "Sometimes she replied with a line or two. Sometimes she ignored me. The last time she wrote, she said," his jaw tightened, "she told me you were dead after an accident. She said you didn't need me anymore." The idea that she could lie about death, one of the most extreme things a person could do, made my stomach flip. She hadn't protected me. She decided for both of us that our lives would be easier if he vanished. When I finally asked if he wanted to press charges, if he wanted justice, his face hardened for a moment. "I want to know the truth," he said. "I want the paperwork, the dates, the proof. I want acknowledgement, not vengeance. But I can't unmake the years. I can only be here now." He reached out and squeezed my hand. "I want to meet you. Not as a ghost in letters, but as a father." The word father felt like a slow return of color to a pale thing. It was not a cure for what had been stolen, but it was a beginning. When we left the cafe, we walked along the water and talked about practical things, how my life could fit into his world, whether staying in touch would be complicated for him, the ways we might bridge the distance between the family he'd built and the life I'd been given. He was cautious about where I lived. His wife was cautious too. Pride and embarrassment and shame and hope braided together into a fragile, earnest plan. On the drive home, the city lights blurred into long streaks, and I felt, as irrational as it sounds, a sense of reclamation. A part of my history had been found and returned to me, not polished but present. I thought of Mom back at the house, of the letters in her drawer, lying quiet like unpaid invoices. When I pulled into the driveway, my phone buzzed. I ignored it and went inside. Mom was sitting at the kitchen table, the same posture as the night she'd confessed a fraction of the truth. She looked up when I came in, and for the first time I saw fear there, raw and real. "You met him," she said. Not a question. "Yes," I answered. I set the envelope I'd taken from the box, the one addressed to me that she'd never opened, on the table between us. It felt smaller than it had in the garage. She stared at the paper, and for the first time she looked like someone who'd been stripped of the scripts she'd been using for years. "Please," she said, voice small. "Let's talk before you do anything." I didn't say yes. I didn't say no. I only sat down and folded my hands, feeling the tension between the life I'd been told and the life I was finding. The truth had arrived, and it was louder than any of us had expected. What came next would be careful, deliberate, and cold, because I had time now. I had proof, a father who wanted me, and letters that could no longer be hidden. The slow work of undoing a lifetime of lies had begun. For the first time, I didn't avoid her gaze. I wanted her to see that I wasn't the scared kid who used to swallow her stories. I wanted her to see that every word she said now had to fight through the truth I finally owned. She sat across from me at the table, eyes darting from the unopened letter to my face. "You don't understand," she whispered. "He's not who you think he is." I leaned back, calm. "I met him. I think I understand perfectly." Her mouth opened, then closed again. She looked smaller, cornered. "What did he tell you?" "The truth," I said. The air between us was thick enough to taste. She stared at the envelope on the table, like it was something alive that might bite her. "You shouldn't have done that," she said, voice trembling. "You've ruined everything." "No, Mom," I said softly. "You did that 20 years ago. I'm just cleaning up after you." Her face hardened then, and the mask slipped back into place. The same calm, perfect composure she wore at every PTA meeting, every church dinner, every time someone said, "You're such a strong woman." "You think you're better than me," she said quietly. "You think you can judge what I did when you weren't there?" I didn't answer. I didn't have to. The silence itself was judgment enough. For days, she tried to act like nothing had changed. She hummed while making breakfast, asked if I needed laundry done, watched TV at night like our house wasn't a tomb of secrets. But every movement was rehearsed, every smile tight. It was strange to watch her like that, like seeing a magician repeat a trick after you already know the illusion. I saw her check her phone every hour, probably expecting a call from Thomas. I knew she was waiting for me to explode so she could play the victim again. But I didn't. I just observed. She used to have control because she owned the story. Now I did. And I planned to use it carefully. 2 weeks passed before she cracked. It happened on a Sunday morning. I came into the kitchen and found her staring at the unopened letter, still sitting on the table where I'd left it. She looked exhausted, makeup smudged, hands trembling slightly. "Are you just going to keep torturing me?" she asked. "Opening the truth isn't torture," I said. "You don't know what I went through," she whispered. "You don't know what kind of man he used to be." "Then tell me," I said. She hesitated, like she was deciding how much to twist. Then she said, "He hit me once, after a fight about money. I told myself I'd forgive him, but I couldn't let you grow up around that." It sounded rehearsed again, too polished, too convenient. And I might have believed her once. But I'd already heard his side. I'd already seen the hospital records, found no reports, no visits, nothing that matched her timeline. I set my coffee down and looked at her steadily. "If you're going to lie, at least keep your stories consistent." She flinched like I'd struck her. "You don't believe me?" "No," I said. "Not anymore." Her lip quivered, and for a brief second, I thought she might drop the act. But instead, she straightened and crossed her arms. "You'll regret turning on me, Liam. I did everything for you." I almost laughed. "You did everything to me." After that, something changed in her eyes. She stopped trying to justify. She started trying to control again. She made phone calls I couldn't hear. She whispered when I entered the room. She started showing up at the office unannounced, pretending she was checking in. But she didn't realize that while she was busy pretending, I was busy documenting. Every lie, every shift in her story, every he said / she said detail, I wrote it all down. I scanned the letters. I recorded our conversations. She'd weaponized narrative for years. I was finally arming myself with facts. Then came the church brunch, Mom's favorite event. The one place where she was still untouchable. I went because she invited me, probably hoping to parade her dutiful son in front of her friends. She laughed loudly, touched arms, told everyone how proud she was of me. Her face glowed with that polished perfection people always mistook for sincerity. And I watched, silent, as the mask worked its charm. But masks have cracks. When one of her closest friends, Mrs. Davenport, asked how my father was, I saw Mom's face flicker. Just a twitch, but it was there. "Oh," she said with forced cheer, "you know how it is. He's been gone a long time. Mrs. Davenport smiled politely. That's funny. I thought I saw him on social media. Looked like him anyway. Same last name. Mom's smile froze. You must be mistaken. I leaned in slightly. She's not. The table went quiet. Mom shot me a glare sharp enough to cut glass. I smiled back small, knowing it wasn't an outburst, not a scene. Just a whisper of truth, enough to make her sweat. That night, she slammed my door open. Are you trying to destroy me? No, I said, closing my laptop. You're doing fine on your own. After that, she started to unravel. Her friends stopped calling as often. Rumors started spreading. Whispers about the other man, the hidden son, the letters. I didn't have to say a word. I just made sure the right people saw enough evidence to start asking questions. By the end of the month, her boss called her in for a personal matter meeting. When she came home, she didn't speak to me. She went straight to her room and stayed there for hours. The next morning, I found her at the kitchen table again, the unopened letter finally in her hands. Her eyes were red, her voice hoarse. I read it, she said quietly. I waited. It wasn't what I thought it would be, she said. He wasn't cruel. He wasn't angry. He just wanted you to know he loved you. She looked up, tears spilling down her cheeks. I don't know how to live with that now. I didn't answer. I couldn't. There was a time when that would have broken me. Now it just confirmed what I already knew. Lies rough from the inside out. That night, she tried one last time to mend it. She knocked on my door, holding 2 mugs of tea like we were still pretending to be normal. I can't undo what I did, she said quietly. But I did it because I thought I had to. I thought if I controlled the story, I could control the pain. I took the mug, but didn't drink. You controlled everything except the truth. She nodded. And now the truth is all I have left. For a moment, I almost pitied her. Then I remembered the years she'd stolen, the birthdays she'd let him cry through, the letters she'd hidden, the love she'd buried. So I said nothing. The next morning, I left early and mailed a thick brown envelope to a reporter I'd met through a friend, a quiet journalist who specialized in human interest stories about families and second chances. Inside were copies of the letters, proof of the lie, and one photo, the one with my father holding me in the park. I didn't sign my name that I didn't have to. When the journalist called, I almost didn't answer. I'd sent the envelope with no return address, assuming it would drift quietly into the void, one more unverified tip in an ocean of mail. But he had done his homework. Liam Collins, the voice said. This is Daniel Reed from the Chronicle. I received a package of letters that might relate to your family. I want to make sure the facts are right before I publish anything. The tone wasn't hungry for scandal. It was steady, careful, someone who'd rather tell a complicated truth than a sensational lie. That steadiness made me breathe easier. I just want the story told, I said. Not twisted. I understand, he replied. We can do this quietly. The point isn't to humiliate anyone. It's to show what happens when people try to erase each other's stories. For the first time in weeks, the word erase didn't sound like an accusation. It sounded like an opportunity to restore what had been deleted. The article appeared a week later under the headline, The Letters Never Sent. A son's search for the father he was told didn't exist. No last names, no address, just the bones of the truth. It told about a mother who'd been frightened, a father who'd been lost, and a child who'd grown up in the fog between them. It didn't call anyone a villain. It just described how fear can turn into silence, how silence becomes distance, and how distance, if you let it, becomes its own kind of lie. I read it 3 times. Each time it hurt less. By noon that day, my phone started buzzing. Friends, cousins, people I hadn't heard from in years. Some messages were curious, some sympathetic, some awkwardly supportive. A few came from people I knew were close to Mom. Is this about you and your mom? She must be devastated. You were brave to tell it. Brave. I didn't feel brave. I just felt exposed. When I got home that evening, Mom was waiting on the porch. She wasn't angry. She just looked hollow, like someone who'd been walking all day and had finally realized she'd taken the wrong road. I read it, she said quietly. Everyone did. I nodded. It wasn't about destroying you. I know. She folded her arms. then unfolded them. It was still the truth, wasn't it? Yes. We stood there in the golden light, not quite comfortable, not quite at war. The neighbor's sprinklers hissed. The world kept turning. She sank onto the step. When I saw the headline, I thought, there goes my life. But then I read it again, and I realized it wasn't about punishment. It was about seeing. That's all I ever wanted, I said. She looked at me for a long moment. You look like him when you're calm, she whispered. It scares me. I'm not here to scare you, Mom. I'm just done pretending. Her eyes filled, but she didn't cry. You've made sure no one else will, either. Everyone knows now. That wasn't the point, I said. I didn't want revenge. I wanted reality to stop depending on your version of it. For the first time, she nodded like she actually understood. In the days that followed, something unexpected happened. The same people who had once admired her perfection began to speak to her differently. Not cruelly, just more honestly. They asked questions, they offered small kindnesses without the pedestal. She looked uncomfortable with it, but she didn't run. She started volunteering at the community center where no one cared who she'd been, only who she was willing to be now. She told me later that the first time she walked in, someone handed her a mop instead of a microphone, and she realized how much lighter it felt not to perform. As for me, I kept seeing my father. We met for lunch on Fridays, called on Sundays. He didn't try to replace what was gone. He just listened, and that was enough. Sometimes, after those lunches, I'd drive past Mom's house. She'd be in the yard, trimming hedges, looking up when she heard my car, but not waving. I'd slow down, and she'd nod once, a quiet acknowledgement that truth had made us smaller, but somehow more real. One evening, months later, she invited me over. The air smelled of rain and lilac. On the table between us were 2 mugs and the old blue box that had once held the letters. I've been reading them, she said. All of them. I didn't think I could, but I did. I braced myself. He loved you, she continued. And I was so afraid of what that love might demand of me. It's easier to build a cage when you're afraid. I nodded slowly. But cages don't stop time. They just make it quieter. She smiled sadly. You sound like him. For the first time, I didn't mind. We didn't fix everything that night, but we started something better, something honest. Before I left, she handed me the last unopened letter. This one was for me, she said. You should have it now. The envelope was yellowed, the handwriting softer than I remembered. If fear makes you run, I understand. But don't let it make you hide forever. The boy deserves more than a story made of silence. She watched me read it, then whispered, he was right. I put the letter down gently. He usually is. When I walked out into the cool night air, I realized the revenge I'd once imagined, the cold, silent reckoning, had turned into something else entirely. It wasn't about her regret anymore. It was about freedom, mine, his, even hers. The truth hadn't destroyed us. It had simply demanded that we stop living behind masks. And sometimes that's punishment enough. The story didn't explode like a scandal. It spread the way truth usually does, quietly, through whispers that started in grocery aisles and church parking lots, between people who spoke softly but never forgot what they'd heard. At first, Mom tried to maintain her poise. She went to work, smiled at neighbors, acted like nothing had changed. But people's eyes lingered longer now. Their voices softened in that way they do when sympathy replaces admiration. She'd spent decades building her image out of perfect edges, kind, selfless, unshakable. Now, those edges were beginning to blur. It wasn't cruelty. No one shouted or pointed fingers. They just stopped believing everything she said. That, I realized, was the quiet kind of consequence truth delivers. It doesn't destroy, it humbles. One afternoon, I stopped by the grocery store where she used to know every cashier by name. I saw her in line, head slightly bowed, avoiding eye contact. When Mrs. Davenport, her closest friend, came up behind her, there was an awkward pause instead of a warm greeting. Mary, Mrs. Davenport said, voice hesitant. I read that piece. I didn't know. Mom forced a small smile. Neither did I. Not fully. That answer silenced the next question before it could even form. When she left the store, I watched her pause in the parking lot, take a deep breath, and look around like someone seeing the world without a filter for the first time. She'd been stripped of the illusion that had protected her all her life. At home, she started cleaning out drawers and closets. Old awards, framed certificates, church letters of thanks. All the artifacts of the woman everyone could trust. I found her one evening in the living room, surrounded by boxes. "You don't have to get rid of everything," I said. She shook her head. "Idol, every piece of this is part of the story I made up." She looked up at me then, her eyes red but steady. "You did what I couldn't do. You told the truth. And now, I have to live in it." I didn't say I'd done it for her. I hadn't. But part of me was glad she could finally see that truth wasn't vengeance. It was daylight. The following Sunday, I went back to church for the first time in months. The air inside felt different, quieter. When Mom walked in, heads turned. No one whispered, no one stared for long, but the shift was palpable. After the service, the pastor came over. "Mary," he said gently, "truth hurts before it heals. Don't run from the part that hurts." She nodded, and for once, didn't try to explain herself. Later, she found me by the steps outside. "You're not here to gloat, are you?" she asked. "No," I said, "just to see what honesty looks like in daylight." She gave a sad smile. "It's not as flattering as I'd hoped." "It never is," I said. Weeks passed. She resigned from the community committees she'd once chaired. Some people avoided her out of discomfort. Others quietly reached out. The ones who stayed were the ones who valued truth more than appearances. Her world didn't collapse. It shrank into something real. And for the first time, she began filling it with things that mattered. She started volunteering at a youth center, teaching kids how to handle small finances, budgeting, and responsibility. "I used to be good at pretending everything added up," she said once. "Now I'm teaching them how to make things actually add up." That was her version of an apology. My father called one evening. "She wrote me a letter," he said. I froze. What did it say? That she's sorry. That she lied because she couldn't stand who she was when she told the truth. He paused. "I'm not sure what to do with that." "Keep it," I said. "It's her turn to write letters no one answers." He didn't argue. Months later, the journalist emailed me again. "Your story has started a small movement. People are writing about reconnecting with lost parents, confronting old lies. Thought you'd want to know." I sat there, reading that line again and again. I hadn't meant to start anything, but maybe that's how lessons travel, quietly, through other people's courage. Mom and I eventually met for dinner. It wasn't forgiveness, not exactly. More like acknowledgement. "I used to think protecting someone meant hiding the truth from them," she said. "Now I know it just keeps both people trapped." I nodded. "Truth hurts, but lies rot." She smiled faintly. "That's something your father would say. We ate mostly in silence. The easy kind, not the dangerous kind." Before I left, she touched my hand. "You were right to teach me the lesson I wouldn't teach myself." It wasn't triumph that I felt then. It was peace. Because sometimes the only revenge worth taking is helping someone face the truth they spent their life running from. That night, I opened the last of my father's letters. It was short. No anger, no blame. "Son, people fail us for reasons that make sense only to them. We can't rewrite what's been done, but we can write what happens next. Be kind, but never blind." I folded it neatly, placed it in the blue box where Mom's photo had once been, and locked it away. Not as evidence, as closure. The story that had started with lies ended with lessons. And if anyone asked me what revenge looked like, I'd tell them this. It looks like truth spoken aloud. It sounds like silence accepted, and it feels like finally being free. The morning after our dinner, I woke to a quiet I hadn't felt in years. It wasn't the silence of avoidance, the kind that presses down on your chest. It was the calm that comes after a storm has finally spent itself. For months, I'd lived waiting for fallout, for another lie, another twist. But it never came. My mother didn't vanish into self-pity. She didn't try to fix things overnight. She just stopped pretending. That was enough. I saw her less often now. Sometimes by choice, sometimes because space was the only way either of us could heal. We texted once or twice a week, small things like how's work, or do you need anything from the store? Polite, distant, civil. Every time, she ended her messages with I'm proud of you. It took me a while to understand she wasn't claiming credit for who I'd become. She was acknowledging who she hadn't allowed me to be. That in its own way was progress. My father and I grew closer in the spaces she'd left behind. We started working together on a small renovation project upstate, a quiet cabin on Lockridge Lake, the same one he'd always dreamed of finishing. It became our ritual. He'd handle the measurements. I'd do the wiring. We barely talked about the past anymore. The work said enough. Once, while fitting a frame together, he looked over at me and said, "You know, your mother wasn't evil. Just afraid." "I know," I said. "Fear's a strange thing. It makes people think control is safety." He smiled faintly. "You learn that younger than most." That was the closest we ever came to discussing forgiveness. The local paper ran a follow-up piece about the story a few months later, an op-ed titled, "When Truth Saves Families Instead of Breaking Them." It mentioned our case only briefly, but the journalist had written something that stuck with me. Forgiveness is not the absence of consequence. It's the willingness to live honestly in its shadow. That line described exactly where I was living. I hadn't forgiven my mother in words, but I had stopped wishing her pain. The truth itself had been enough of a teacher. Every whisper, every sideways glance, every friendship that had to be rebuilt from the ground up, that was her repayment. Not vengeance, just balance. When I visited her that fall, her house looked different. The framed awards were gone. The walls were bare except for one small photo. The three of us, me, her, and my father, standing in the park the day before she left him. I don't know how she got it. Maybe he'd sent it. Maybe she'd always had it hidden away. "I thought you didn't keep pictures of him," I said. She looked at the frame. "I used to think looking at him made me weak. Now I think pretending he didn't exist made me worse." She turned back to me. "People still talk, you know, but I don't mind anymore. Every time they do, I remind myself they're not wrong. I did lie. I did steal years. But I can tell the truth now without shaking." There was a kind of peace in her face I hadn't seen before. It wasn't the old polished mask. It was quieter, rough around the edges, but real. "Are you happy?" I asked. She thought for a moment. "Not yet, but I'm honest. That's a start." That night, driving home, I thought about the word honest, that IT had cost both of us so much trust, reputation, even love, but it had also given us something back. The chance to start over, without illusion. I stopped by the lake before heading back to the city. The cabin was nearly finished. I sat on the porch steps, the cold wood beneath me, and opened the notebook where I'd been writing down thoughts about everything that had happened. At the top of one page, I wrote, "Some people hurt you because they're cruel. Others hurt you because they're scared. The result is the same, but the lesson is different." Then below it, "Forgiveness is freedom, but so is walking away." I mailed my mother a letter the next morning. Just a short one. "Mom, I don't hate you. I don't know if I ever will. I just needed to stop living in a story you wrote for both of us that I found my father. I found peace. I hope one day you'll find yours. Liam. No anger. No final judgment. Just truth. The one thing she'd never given me, but had finally taught me to value." Months passed before she replied. Her handwriting was shaky but familiar. "Liam, I used to think revenge was the opposite of love. Now I think it's a form of it, the kind that forces people to see what they've broken. You were right to teach me. Thank you for not giving up on truth, even when it cost us everything, Mom." I folded the letter carefully and placed it beside my father's last note in the same box where all the old lies used to live. Now it held only truth. Sometimes I still visit the park from the old photo. Kids run past. Parents call out names. The air smells like cut grass and forgiveness. That's what revenge should feel like, I think. Not triumph, not destruction, but release. Because in the end, the best kind of justice isn't loud. It's quiet. It's the life you build when you finally stop running from what's real. I used to think endings came with noise, with doors slamming, shouts echoing down hallways, or the satisfying thud of something breaking. But the real endings, the ones that matter, are quiet. They happen in small moments when you realize the past no longer has a hold on you. It was a year to the day since the article came out when the final letter arrived. Not from my mother or father, but from me. I wrote it the night before, sealed it, and addressed it to myself. One last message from the version of me who'd lived through all of this to the person I hope to become. I placed it in the mailbox, knowing that by the time it came back, I'd be ready to read it. The day it arrived, I drove out to the cabin my father and I had finished. The lake was still, a perfect mirror. The air smelled like pine and possibility. I sat on the porch steps, opened the envelope, and read. Liam, if you're reading this, it means you've made peace with what happened. Not by forgetting, but by understanding. You once thought revenge was about proving someone wrong. Now you know it's about proving yourself right, about showing that truth survives even when love doesn't. Your mother will spend the rest of her life facing the truth she hid. That's her lesson. Your father will carry both love and loss. That's his. But you carry the proof that honesty heals more than lies ever protect. You didn't destroy anyone. You simply stopped protecting the lie that destroyed you. Keep walking in that truth. It will hurt, but it will never rot. Ed. I folded the letter and smiled. It wasn't triumph. It was relief. That same afternoon, my father joined me. He brought sandwiches and that easy silence we'd perfected between us. You've changed, he said after a while. So have you, I said. He laughed softly. I think I just caught up. We talked about work, about the cabin, about the future. Then, out of nowhere, he said, Your mother called? I stiffened, but he raised a hand. Don't worry. It wasn't dramatic. She just wanted to thank me for forgiving her. Did you? I asked. He looked out at the lake. Not in words. But I didn't hang up. Sometimes that's enough. I nodded. That's all I want too. Enough. Later that evening, I went back into the cabin. There was one wall we'd left bare, unfinished pine, waiting for something meaningful. I framed 2 letters side by side, one from my father, the last from my mother. On a small plaque below, I engraved a single sentence. Truth doesn't ruin families. Lies do. That became the room's heart. Whenever light came through the window, it hit that plaque first, glowing gold against the wood. People often ask what happened to my mother afterward. The truth is, not much that anyone could see from the outside. She still lived in the same house, still worked part-time at the youth center. But she was different. Softer, quieter, slower to speak. I visited her occasionally. We didn't talk about the past anymore. We didn't need to. It lived between us like a scar, visible, healed, but permanent. One afternoon, I found her sitting on the porch, sorting through old photos. She handed me one without a word. It was of me at 5 years old, holding a kite while she stood in the background, smiling at something out of frame. I used to tell myself that day was perfect, she said. Now I see all the cracks in the picture. But maybe that's okay. Perfect things don't last anyway. No, I said, but honest things do. She smiled, and for the first time in years, it wasn't forced. Months later, I got another email from Daniel, the journalist who'd written the story. He was putting together a collection called Truth Heals, families that found redemption through honesty. He wanted to include ours. Are you sure? I wrote back. It's a lot of old pain. He replied, pain becomes wisdom when it's shared. Someone else out there needs your ending. I thought about that for a long time. Then I sent him a new version of our story, not about lies, but about what honesty had cost and what it had saved. The day it published, I received hundreds of messages. Some were from people who'd reconnected with parents, others who'd finally told the truth about old wounds. Every message said the same thing in different words. Thank you for showing that the truth doesn't have to destroy. That was the moment I understood the purpose of everything that had happened. The suffering hadn't been for vengeance. It had been for awareness. When you hurt someone, you don't get to choose how they teach you the lesson. But when the lesson is truth, everyone eventually learns. A year later, on my birthday, My mother sent one final letter, and no preamble, no apology. Just this. I used to think you were my second chance at happiness. I was wrong. You were my second chance at honesty. Thank you for letting me learn, even when it cost you. I love you, Mom. I framed it next to my own final letter to myself. Not because I needed to remember the pain, but because it reminded me that even the worst mistakes can be rewritten into something worth keeping. Standing on the cabin porch that evening, I watched the sun sink into the lake and thought about everything that had brought me there. Truth, pain, forgiveness, freedom. For words that, together, made the shape of a life. They say revenge is best served cold, I said quietly to the reflection in the water. But I think it's better when it melts, when it turns into something human again. Because in the end, that's what real revenge stories are meant to do. Not to make people bleed, but to make them see. To remind them that the people they hurt are the ones who hold the mirror. And sometimes, holding it up is punishment enough. If this story moved you, make sure to subscribe, like, and comment below. Tell us, have you ever learned a truth that changed everything? Because sometimes, the hardest truth is the one that finally sets everyone free.